It was the hottest gig in town. Within hours of the event being announced, all the £1,000 a head tickets had gone. Thank God for those uncapped bonuses. Anyone who was anyone in the business world was here. Executives from Goldman Sachs, Google, MasterCard, HSBC, and countless more besides. Not because they especially wanted to be there, more because they were desperate to not miss out on being there. There were FTSE 100 bosses in tears not to have made the cut. So that Jon Surtees was John Crace, who is the Guardian parliamentary sketch writer, and also he was the ghostwriter for Robin Smith with Robin Smith's autobiography. And he
What
was
a
writing
career.
in the Guardian on the 1st of February this year on Labour's second annual business conference, which was held at the Oval. So
Was.
it featured
Yeah,
Keir Starmer, didn't it? And Rachel
it
Reeves,
did.
and there were bacon baguettes, and there were free pens and notebooks. And you know all about this because you were actually there for this
I
historic event.
was I was actually there at this historic event, yeah, stood at the back trying to keep a low profile in a room full of people who bother the FTSE index far more than I do. But yeah, it was amazing. It was a lovely day. The ground looked spectacular. It was one of those lovely sort of cold, sunny days, and it was in this big room in the new stand that got built recently with the sun shining in. The whole shadow cabinet were there, and even the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, came in at the end as well. Who I think is more of a cricket fan than Keir Starmer. Tom, is that right?
Yeah, I think he is. I actually met him. I ran into him at the Pavilion once.
Oh, really?
I
What amazing. He actually used to work here, believe it or not.
Did he?
He was a steward. Yeah, him and his brother were
Wow.
stewards here in their early 20s. He, has told me personally before that he feels like he would be one of the worst stewards he'd ever had because he was far more interested in watching the cricket and as was his brother, than he was in actually doing the job that he was being paid to do. He also trialled for Surrey when he was 15 and I think still bears a slight grudge that he was rejected by the great Jeff Arnold, but I guess if he hadn't been rejected,
Do you
where
know,
would he be?
John, there was no sense of any grudge when I spoke to him. He was he was
Really?
he was very much team Surrey. And I guess that the fact
That
that you
always
have
helps.
all these, all these kind of fat cats coming because the previous, Labour annual business conference was actually at Canary Wharf. So, I mean, how
Right.
do you feel that the Oval is paired with Canary Wharf as, one of the great kind of powerhouses of capitalism?
I think it's up there. I mean, you could get a lovely view of Canary Wharf from the top of the stand that the Labour conference was in for a start. But yeah, I guess it does show that the success of a business. Canary Wharf is clearly an iconic venue, and it does show that I guess the people that do the conference and event stuff here, which obviously all the money that is made feeds into all the general running of our cricket club, are doing a pretty great job. If we can take business off Canary Wharf, I guess you got to be pleased with that.
And the thing is, John, it's also a reminder that the Oval has always been a business right from the
Right,
very beginning. So people who
right,
listen to our what I'm losing track now, our second episode about the beginnings of the Oval will remember
yeah,
that it was set up by a rather dodgy businessman, even though he was a chemist who lived on Brixton Hill, where we both live, and we're both
yeah,
absolute models of probity. But he wasn't entirely. So this was William Houghton, and he'd obviously gone into debt to raise the money to take the land on which the Oval was built. And so he was always kind of looking around for dodgy schemes that would enable him to raise some money. And
mm,
um, and this is why in late summer 1851, he used the Oval as a venue for a sport that wasn't cricket. And that sport was pedestrianism. And we're just gonna talk
pedestrianism.
about that, and we're gonna talk about all the other sports that have been played at the Oval that aren't cricket, and we're gonna talk about some of the other as well as the kind of the, business people meeting there. We've also got much more excitingly, we've got rock concerts to come, haven't we? We've got
Yeah,
helicopters landing, we've got Hollywood
helicopters.
stars arriving, so we've got loads and loads to talk about today. But
Yeah,
shall we kick off by looking at the pedestrianism? Because
I
this
think
is
we
the
should,
yeah,
absolutely. Look, and
it's
I think if you think you know where this episode is gonna go, you may be sorely mistaken. This episode
yeah.
will turn many right angles and plumb many depths. There is this is a ground with many non-cricketing stories to tell.
Yeah, I mean, and most of the sports that have been played here are, often massive sports today have had absolutely iconic first matches played here. But the
Yeah,
sport that we're going to begin with, this pedestrianism, this is something that isn't really done anymore. Although reading about it, I think actually it sounds quite fun. So
yeah,
specifically, it's a form of pedestrianism, which is obviously walking, but it's an exploit called a Barclay match. and this is named after a guy called Captain Robert Barclay, who in 1809 on Newmarket Heath, so near the racecourse, a place obviously that is absolutely plugged into gambling, and I think this is what it's all about. He did this extraordinary thing where he walked 1 mile every hour for 1,000 hours in succession.
1,000 hours.
So that's 1,000 miles. And it took him 41 days and 16 hours. And it was a completely mythic feat. And it was so mythic that whenever someone in the kind of the decades that followed that tried to do it, it would rouse massive, massive public interest. And in 1850, so this is the year before the Oval opens itself up to this exciting sport, a massive new star in the world of pedestrianism had emerged. And this is a guy called Richard Manx.
What a guy.
Good name.
What a guy, yeah.
So he's not a local. He's born in Solihull, so in the Midlands. And he was a brickmaker. And I think that, working with his hands, working with his arms, standing up all day, gave him the physique that would enable him to endure walking miles and miles and miles, and also, of course, staying awake. Because if you're having to walk a mile every hour, I mean, you're not going to get a good night's sleep at all. And
No.
he had initially been, he was a very kind of distinguished middle and long distance runner, so marathons and that kind of thing. And this had given him the nickname of the Warwickshire Antelope.
Now that's world class. That's the Warwickshire Antelope.
Warwickshire
so good.
Antelope. So a sports promoter in 1850 came to the Warwickshire Antelope and said, "Look, you should. Why don't you go for a Barclay match? Why don't you try and pull off this amazing feat?" And so he did. And then the following June, so we're now June 1851, he pulls off his greatest feat. He goes beyond the achievements of Captain Robert Barclay to incredible. He pushes back the limits of what pedestrians are capable of. So this is what he does. And again, he does this at a cricket ground. It's the Barrack Tavern cricket ground, which is in Sheffield. And I'm going to read it out because it's quite complicated. This is written by Derek Martin, who is a historian of pedestrianism. And my life is so improved by knowing that there's such a thing as a historian of pedestrianism. So this is Richard Manx's feat. He was going to walk 1,000 quarter miles in 1,000 consecutive quarter hours. So I don't know how your maths is, John, but that's 250 miles in 10 days and 10 hours. Then immediately he'd done that, he was going to do 1,000 half miles in 1,000 consecutive half hours. So that's 500 miles in 20 days and 20 hours, followed immediately by a conventional Barclay match. So that's 1,000 miles in 1,000 consecutive hours. This would amount in all to the monumental total of 1,750 miles in 72 days and 22 hours. And as if this were not enough, he would begin walking his quarter miles at the beginning of each quarter hour, the half miles on the half hour and the miles on the hour. So that is mad. I mean, that is an absolutely unbelievable sporting achievement.
And people say our society is dumbed down. I mean...
Well, the thing is, like cricket, it requires quite a lot of maths, doesn't it?
I was going to say, you pass your GCSE maths just understanding what the bloke was doing.
Yeah. I always remembered Ron Manager on the Fast Show saying about cricket, "Ooh, maths." But I mean, pedestrianism is even worse.
Complex. That is some complex stuff right there.
And so it leaves Richard Manx as, I mean, he would win Sports Celebrity of the Year. No question. He's one of the biggest sports stars in England. And it's capitalizing on this that William Houghton says, brilliant, let's get him to the Oval, and he can kind of like do an exhibition match. So his aim is he's going to do another Barclay match, and he starts at 6:00 on the 26th of September. So, John, I mean, you work at the Oval. You'll know that fixtures that are scheduled at the end of September, I mean, the weather isn't always reliable, is it?
It's not reliable.
Yeah,
and so they're also not. They don't tend to start at 6 p.m. on the 26th of September as well. They tend to be more of a sort of daytime vibe then.
Yeah, well, but it doesn't stop people from crowding in. There's massive public interest, and so it's a Friday evening. He does it all weekend, and then Monday morning, absolute disaster. He gets a really, really violent attack of the shits, and he's completed 126 miles, but he can't.
That sounds mank.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he's very good. Yeah, exactly. So that's very unfortunate. And so he has to begin again. And by now it's the 10th of October. And
I mean, do you think he was? Do you wonder if he was contracted, or maybe he want? I mean, I just it's extraordinary. Like, does he have to begin again, or is he like, no, I'm gonna do this? You know, if that happened to me, I
I
think I
guess he
might have
wouldn't
just
get
knocked it on the
paid, would
head.
he? He wouldn't get paid unless
Yeah,
he did it. And also
he's got to
there's
do
the
it.
pride. I mean, he's the Warwickshire Antelope.
Yeah,
He doesn't wanna let people
no,
down. So he starts
not
off
with that
again
nickname.
and, he's doing it every hour. People are bringing him food. He drinks tea fortified with brandy. That's his
Ooh,
kind of drink that keeps him going.
I've not tried that.
And then on the 28th of October, so that's 18 days into the challenge, torrential rain finally comes. It's been good weather up until that point, unseasonably
Yeah.
warm, Indian summer, but then absolutely violent downpours. And this is terrible because he's now slipping and sliding in the mud. And the following day, um, he's woken up from one of his his brief snatches of sleep, and he's so upset, he's so foot worn, he's so shattered by all this mud that he punches the bloke in the face.
Oh
So
no!
yeah, so
Oh
an
no!
outbreak of violence, and then he's a broken man by the 31st of October, which is the last scheduled day. So
Yeah,
he's only got a few miles to go, and at 2:30 a.m., so in the middle of the morning, right in the dead of the night, the
yeah.
timekeeper goes to wake him up again. And rather than punch him in the face this time, he just curls up into a ball and sobs,
Oh
and says
no!
he just cries out through his tears, "Do you want to kill me?"
Oh no!
Um,
Poor Richard Manx.
but actually,
Come
Richard
on.
Manx is getting off quite lightly because it
Yeah.
has been known that timekeepers will shoot a gun in the ear of a recalcitrant pedestrian. So he has got off lightly. Anyway, so he does get up and he does it, and thousands of people are cheering him over the finishing line, thousands
Oh
more
wow!
outside. And I think we
Oh my
mentioned this
word!
before that William Houghton he's such an entrepreneur. He's always looking out for ways to
Mm.
maximize the gate revenue, that he's actually set up streetlights all around the course so that people can come in the middle of the night and see it. So basically, the
Floodlit
Oval has
sport.
invented, floodlight, floodlit sport.
Floodlit sport. I believe that's claimed by Bramall Lane, but
No,
we
so
this
this
is
is 20 years earlier, I think, ahead of Bramall Lane.
we're taking this back.
So
We're
that's another
taking this
first
back.
for the Oval, isn't it?
We're coming for you, Sheffield United. You'll be hearing from our
I think
lawyers.
not only are you coming, you've already come. You've got it.
We've
You've
we've
banked
got
it.
there. We've got there. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be getting on the next train.
So this obviously doesn't, it doesn't stop William Houghton staving off bankruptcy, and that's how Surrey County Cricket Club managed to get their hands on the Oval.
Mm.
And they bring in a guy who is absolutely at the heart of many of the stories we're going to be talking about today. He's a guy we've already met in the context of the Ashes, and he's one of your personal heroes, isn't he, John?
He really is. Charles Alcock, one of the greatest men, probably the greatest unsung man in British sport, I would argue.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he's an extraordinary man, and we've really only scratched the surface by kind of introducing him
Yeah,
as the man who essentially is the first promoter of Test cricket in England. But he is so much more. So he's born in
so much more than
Sunderland.
that.
He's the son of an industrialist who owns a shipbuilding firm there, and so as
Mhm.
is the way in the Victorian period, you have kind of bluff northern industrialists who then ruin everything by sending their children to very expensive private schools. And so Alcock goes to Harrow, which is west on kind of West London, isn't it? Very, very,
Yeah.
very exclusive private school where Byron went, Churchill was going to go. Alcock goes there too,
Mm.
and he goes on to make a living as a journalist and as a writer, and he founds and publishes various kind of annuals, sporting annuals, so football annuals, cricket annuals, that kind of thing.
Mm.
But his real talent, as you suggested, is as a sports administrator. And I mean, so in 1870, he becomes both the secretary and the treasurer of the FA, the Football Association, which has only just been founded.
Yeah.
And in 1872, so 2 years later, he becomes secretary of Surrey. So he is simultaneously the secretary of the FA and secretary of Surrey. And I just can't imagine any administrator doing that double header now. I mean, it would just be
No.
impossible, wouldn't it?
No, it's wild. But I think some of the achievements that we're going to go on to talk about probably if I'm sort of familiar with the Victorian mindset, he came up with these ideas, and the FA obviously didn't own a ground until Wembley was built in 1924, I
Yeah.
think. And
Yeah, so
yes,
where are you gonna play? You
where are
know,
you going to play, Charles? Yeah, oh yeah, you can come up with all these brilliant ideas, but where are you going to do it? And he's like, well, I happen to run a cricket ground. It's like, great,
that
off we
needs
go.
money, right? I mean,
Well, a cricket ground that needs money and also
yeah.
has. If you think the oval's big, if you think the playing area, if you think the grass on the oval is big in 2024, yeah, you've got to imagine. Obviously, a lot of this, all the stands from in 1870 hadn't been built, and it was the playing area was even more vast, even greater than it is now. So there was even more space to do things like this there.
Yeah, so the club needs money. Alcock is the secretary, and he's in pole position, therefore, to leverage his contacts in other sports to get them played at the Oval. And
Yeah.
football is, I guess, his great love. And this is why you have some of the seismic moments in the history of football taking place at the Oval. So,
Mm.
first of all, um, international football. So, the first of 5 matches between England and Scotland are played at the Oval, and although this isn't recognised by FIFA, this is the first international match. And the
This
reason
is
it's
the
not
first
recognised
international
by
match. Yeah.
FIFA is because Scotland is represented by Scots who live in London, and this brilliantly includes the son of Gladstone, who
Of
is playing
course.
for
Here he
Scotland.
is again.
He pops up again. Yeah, so we've got a lot
Yeah.
of Liberal prime
Fair.
ministers and their
Yeah.
children in this series, and the
Popping up
result
all
is
over the place.
1-1. And who's captaining it? Your
There
boy,
you go.
Alcock.
Alcock is out there on the field in his hobnail boots.
And he goes on to captain them in all 4 subsequent internationals. So, I mean, he's a
Yeah.
massive. He's the embodiment of Victorian sport. He's not only
Yeah.
running all this stuff; he's actually playing,
But
captaining, organising. I mean, incredible.
But the extraordinary thing after this as well, so these are the games that aren't registered by FIFA, aren't recognised by FIFA. But then what happens is that they then go up to Scotland, and these games are such a success. They go up to Scotland and they right, we're going to play the first game that actually all Scots are available to play in. It's
And they
not
do
just
that
going to
at
be
a cricket
kept to
ground again,
London
don't
Scots.
they? At
They do
Partick.
that at a cricket ground, yeah, yeah, absolutely, in Scotland, and that finishes 0-0. So that is the first officially recognised international by FIFA up in Scotland, and
Doesn't
so then.
Alcock referee that? He's injured, so he
I
can't
think
play, and he referees
Yeah,
it.
that's
I mean,
right. I
it's
think
just
Alcock referees it. Yeah, but then they came back down to London 6 months later. Again, another huge success. We need to build on this. We need to do this again in London, and we're going to play again. All Scots are eligible to selection. All English are eligible to selection. Play at the Oval England against Scotland. England win the subsequent game at the Oval 4-2. So that is why, in both senses, officially recognised by FIFA or not, the Oval can claim England's first ever international goal.
Yeah, brilliant. And I
It's
mean, it's important to emphasise that Alcock is. I mean, he's a genuinely really good footballer. So he's not just playing for England, but he also has this club, doesn't he? The Wanderers
the
FC,
Wanderers. Yeah,
which is
yeah.
founded in 1863, and to begin with,
Mm,
it's old Harrovians. So, I mean,
of
the
course.
idea of I mean, essentially, it's the footballing equivalent of the MCC. It's it's a
Yeah.
club that's full of very posh people who are making the rules, making the laws, um, and
Mm.
it's in this context that the FA Cup is founded and pushed by
Yeah,
Alcock. Because in 1869, the Oval becomes the Wanderers' official home, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah, and again, I don't want to go too much down. We need our friend Jonathan Wilson to go fully down the rabbit hole of football tactics.
Well, Jonathan
But
Wilson, the great football writer, who's also from Sunderland, like Alcock.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And one of the things I think the Wanderers and Alcock are also credited with is called the combination game, because ultimately when football started out, I think the idea was you got the ball and you ran with the ball
Yeah,
until you got stopped. I think in possibly a slightly more violent way than would be considered necessary or indeed allowed these days. And then your mate who tackled you got the ball and he ran off with it. And hence. But then the Wanderers realised that actually in the rules, you were not allowed to be taken out if you didn't have the ball at your feet. So therefore, if you could think about passing the ball to
yeah.
someone and then running off into some space, then you might get the ball back, and then your mate will run off into some space, and off we go. So yeah, not only did they
Which,
do all that,
yeah,
they developed the pass. They developed the passing game.
and it makes their name very appropriate. I mean, obviously, they call themselves the Wanderers because until 1869, they didn't have a home ground when the Oval becomes their home ground. But
Yeah,
it's also the idea that they are floating around the ground, kind of flowing
ethereally
movements. Um,
floating
and
into space.
and it's this that enables them in 1872 when Alcock has not only instituted the FA Cup, not only arranged for the final to be held at the Oval, but actually captains them to victory. And it's kind of an
Captains and
amazing run, isn't it? Because I think this is
yeah.
the final is actually their first victory in the contest.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, yeah, and he also, let's not forget, not personally minced the cup, but is also obviously responsible for designing and ordering the first ever FA Cup, which he then subsequently lifts.
Yeah,
I mean, it
it's
really is
amazing.
it's a triumph. It's a
It,
triumph for him on all levels, yeah.
it's
But
amazing.
yeah, the Wanderers in that first competition did receive a bit of luck in terms of drawing games, and then the subsequent replay, which obviously as we record this, there is none too small level of controversy about FA Cup replays. But in 1872, FA Cup replays didn't take place simply because the team couldn't afford to come back down again and play the game. Such was the difficulties of transport. So
So if you're
ultimately,
playing at your home ground, I mean, your quid's in, aren't you?
you're coincident. I think your 2 out of 3 results will get you through to the next round, largely. Yes.
Yes. So, and this may have something to do with the fact that the Wanderers go on to win the FA Cup the following year in 1873.
Yep.
And then again in 1876, 1877, and 1878.
Yep.
And all three of those consecutive victories were won at the Oval.
Yep.
And I think it is 19 FA Cup finals, is it?
It's 19 of the first 20, yeah. So for some reason in 1873 they went over and maybe you can tell me this because I don't know this. They went over to Lilliput Bridge, which is very near where Stamford Bridge is these days. And for whatever reason
Shocking
they
behaviour.
played.
I mean, why?
Yeah,
Madness. Why would
why
they
are
want
they
to do
do that?
that?
Well, they didn't want to do it particularly, I guess, because then in 1874 they came crying back, and the
Yeah, of
Oval
course they
accepted them
did.
again, and then
Of course they did.
subsequently held the rest of the games. I think the final FA Cup final held at the Oval it was played between Aston Villa and West Brom. So
Yeah,
you can see the football establishment being created around the Oval, and ultimately by the end of it, yeah, it was Bolton Wanderers, Aston Villa, West Bromwich Albion, some of the most historic clubs who are still playing
well,
now were there.
Villa's the club I support. So
Wonderful club,
1887,
wonderful.
I think, their first FA Cup
It's a
victory.
wonderful
So
club.
tremendous.
So, Tom, before we finish football, let me take you back to 2012. It was 130th anniversary of the original FA Cup final, and the decision was made by the club to restage it. Wanderers against Royal Engineers would once again take place at the Oval.
So this was an
Wanderers
anniversary match, John.
anniversary match, yeah,
I'm
130th, I think.
amazed they didn't want to play it at Lord's like they did with the
No,
centenary Test match.
that would have been good, wouldn't it, to pay tribute to the anniversary of matches being played in the wrong place. And so yeah, the Wanderers had gone away for a long time, but had been brought back by a group of enterprising fellas in South London, who were very keen, very passionate. I don't think they were old Harrovians necessarily, but they were
Did
very
they have
passionate
the
about.
whiskers, the mutton chops and
They
big
they
moustaches and
didn't.
things?
They didn't. And again, in retrospect, that was a miss. They should have done. We should have made them.
Missed
We should have made them
opportunity.
do that. Yeah, missed opportunity. We'll file that one down in my groaning box of missed opportunities. And anyway, so they had reformed the Wanderers, and they were raising some good money for charity and whatever, and had had the permission of the families of the original Wanderers to do this, and they were very happy to come into the Oval and play this game against the Royal Engineers. So the Royal Engineers we didn't mention them earlier, but they were the opposition that the Wanderers vanquished in 1872. Just literally the first 11 team of the Royal Engineers.
Oh god, so they'd be made
Um,
of solid muscle,
well, this is the
kind of
problem.
throwing
Yeah, so
bits
they
of
were.
tank across rivers and things.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sort of turning tanks into bridges and then
Yeah.
throwing them across rivers. Yeah. So
So they must have murdered the
well, this was
Wanderers.
this was the problem. Yeah, no one quite realised that a team of, all due respect to the Wanderers, lovely fellas, but Sunday morning pub footballers turning up against the first 11 of the Royal Engineers
Carnage.
might have been a slight mismatch. The other issue was that, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of outfield and grass available in 1872 was significantly more than was available in 2012. So our ground staff put their foot down and quite rightly said, you can build a football pitch on the ground, but it cannot go on the square, and no one can run on the square in football boots because even in November, the damage that would cause is too much. We need to think about the following season.
But it kind of
So
makes you think what was going on in 1870, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I play cricket on a pitch in South London that from September until the end of April is used for football. So I don't see why we can't do it at the Oval, frankly. But maybe I don't know anything about groundsmanship. Who knows? maybe I should stay what I'm doing, and the ground staff should keep doing what they're doing. But so we made the pitch on the outfield, and it was fine. It was slightly thinner than a normal football pitch, but not much. But maybe a couple of feet either side. But we didn't think it would make too much too much difference to the game. Obviously, not being a professional footballer or anyone that's ever played football to any standard, what I didn't realise is that it would then make long throw-ins level to the penalty area as absolute elite weapons in the game, because of course you didn't need a particularly long throw-in, and you didn't need to loop the ball particularly high to actually get the ball in there. You could just throw the ball flat at head height into the penalty area. So the Royal Engineers, who lost the original game, as we said, enacted some pretty serious revenge, and I think won the game 7-1. And I think
Oh, wow.
the one may have been a kindness on their part rather than necessarily an
Do you
earned
know,
goal.
I thought the result would be worse than that. I reckon
No, yeah,
7-1 is pretty creditable under the circumstances.
yeah. I think they were sort of in the spirit in the spirit of the army. I think they kind of felt like they stood off a bit towards the end, possibly.
I thought the soldiers were trained to kill, be merciless, go in for
I think
go for the jugular.
I, I think
But
that was the first 20 minutes.
it's the woke modern army, John. Terrible behaviour. Well,
Terrible behaviour from the engineers.
so you restaged the football, but have you restaged the first rugby international, which
No.
amazingly took place in the same year as the first FA Cup final? So if you're worried
Yeah.
about football boots churning up the square, imagine rugby boots must be even worse. I mean, they're much larger, aren't they, rugby players, and they have scrums and things. And
Scrums and rucks and mauls, yeah,
yeah, it was
dangerous business.
terrible.
If you're a piece of turf, you don't want to be rucked over.
No, so that, as with the football, is England against Scotland. I mean, I think at this point those were the only international rugby teams there were.
Yeah, yeah.
England win, and the Oval goes on to host 6 more rugby internationals. Last one played in 1979, and all against Scotland.
Including all against Scotland by one, I think, including the game which was the first ever match of the Irish rugby
Oh,
football team.
right, okay. Well, that's good to know.
So Ireland made their international bow at the Oval.
Oh, well, that's good to know. And did England win that one? I think they won
I
them all, didn't
can't.
they? I think
I
they won
think
them
they
all.
probably did. I can't tell you the result of that specific game, but yeah, I know that the BBC came here a few years ago to record a sort of sepia-tinged piece about the history of Irish rugby, and they started with John Envedell wandering on the turf.
That's great. Well, I mean, so that is the last international rugby match is played in 1879. I mean, it's amazing to think that all these matches are going on before Test cricket has really established itself at all. That the first cricket international is later than the first football and rugby international at the Oval.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
really amazing. So, and this is all
it really was.
doing.
It was the country's first attempt at a national stadium, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, and we at the beginning, when we did when we introduced this series, we were talking about why the Oval ranks as perhaps the most historic sports ground, not just cricket ground, and I think that illustrates why, and it is down to Alcock, basically, isn't it? I mean, he's the kind of the eminence grise behind it. But John,
absolutely, it's astonishing history.
So cricket, obviously, football, rugby, but there've been lots of other sports as well. So athletics, following in the wake of pedestrianism, 1869. There's a big meeting held there, and it's not a success. In fact, it's described as a wretched failure. But it's worth mentioning because of the athlete who wins the hurdles at that meet, which is none other than W.G. Grace. He was a very, very distinguished hurdler, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know why it was a wretched failure, Tom?
Why?
Pre-Alcock.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Alcock
it's the malign shadow of William Houghton and his dodgy Brixton Hill dealings.
If Alcock had run that athletics meeting, the first ever Olympics would have been held at the Oval, I swear.
Absolutely would. Okay, hockey. So that's where the England women hockey team play it in the 30s, don't they? Through to 1949. And in 1938, it's, I think, the first team sport to be televised by the BBC, and they're doing that as a kind of warm up for the test match that's going to come that summer. So they're kind of scoping it out, working out where to put the cameras and things like that. So that's very exciting.
Incredible,
And then there's Aussie rules.
Aussie rules.
So the Oval was at one point called the Foster's Oval,
The Foster's
after
Oval, it
Australia's
was.
national drink.
Yeah, shout
Um,
out to the great Bernie Coleman. And so the Foster's Oval, another oval first that's worth throwing in at some point. First ever ground in the UK, at least, to give its name away to a sponsor, which
I
is
don't
now
know whether
very
that's something
now
to be proud of or not. But
it's now common practice. But it's to your point earlier about the oval always being a business. I think that was
yeah,
absolutely one of those things.
but
But
I think also
yeah,
very nice for Australians to come to the Oval and feel that part of their national
yeah,
culture is
well, absolutely,
has
yeah.
been woven into it. And talking of national culture, Aussie rules. So
Aussie rules, yeah. So
so
there's an
this is
ever
fostered
growing.
by, because Channel 4 started covering Aussie rules, didn't they,
They did,
in the
yeah, fostered.
80s?
Yeah, very good. Fostered.
Very good. Yes.
So
Just
so
flows,
Channel
doesn't it? This is
they
podcasting
just it
genius.
just you just can't help them. You just
Yeah.
can't help yourself. The Channel 4 fostered the Foster's International Cup, which was a whole series of exhibition games which used to take place in sort of October, November kind of time, in the off season, the Australian domestic off season. But they were hugely successful at the start and sort of gradually dropped off. But I think
Wasn't there
they're
some
most well
incredibly
known.
violent
Well,
match where everyone had
what
got an enormous
um,
punch up?
Well, I mean, you're talking about Australian rules in general, I
Yeah, I
think,
know,
possibly
but
there.
even by
But
the
there, I think
standards of Aussie rules, it was.
even by the standards they set themselves, yeah. I think let me take you back to 1987 and the Foster's International Cup match between North Melbourne and Carlton. Now, Adam Collins, a friend of this parish, Surrey commentator, Final Word podcaster, is particularly obsessed with this. But my understanding is that the match in Australia is known as the Battle of Britain. Such was the level of enmity between the players and the violence that ensued, and there were multiple bans issued from both sides on the game. My favourite one being the ban for a player called Alistair Clarkson, who broke his opposition player Ian Aitken's jaw. And you'd thought, yeah, okay, great. He got 4 weeks.
Well, that's very Aussie rules, isn't it?
Yeah, but by all accounts, the rain was pouring down in 1987, and yeah, North Melbourne and Carlton, I think, had I don't know exactly what had happened, but something had happened during the season which caused there to be, say, significant levels of violent enmity between those players, and it was agreed that the scores would be settled prior to the start of the next full season in the international fixture at the Oval. So yeah,
Hence the
hence the
vote.
Battle of
Yeah.
Britain. But yeah,
Well,
those were going on for a while. The last one of those was in the about 2011, 2012, something like that. Again, it's because obviously in Australia there's a big culture of playing Aussie rules at cricket grounds just because of the natural shape of them does kind of lend itself. So yeah,
yes, because an oval, yeah, and
uh,
also, of course, an oval lends itself to greyhound racing.
yeah,
And this is
absolutely, yeah,
something. So this amazingly, the idea that the oval could be converted into a greyhound racing
now
stadium was
this was a
actually,
new one on me.
well, it was pushed by the Duchy of Cornwall. So that's basically the Prince of
Yeah,
Wales. I mean,
right, yeah,
unbelievable. And
yeah,
unsurprisingly, there is a storm of protest. So you get lots of men of the cloth, local clergymen,
hmm
warning that it's a sinister menace to Kennington. And the Archbishop Tennyson School, which used to be um, uh,
sadly so.
just behind the Oval. He
hmm
was very worried because he thought that it would open the boys to the malign influence of bookkeepers, which I imagine it would.
Yeah, I
Um,
was going to say, yeah,
and
hard to argue against
my
that
favorite.
one.
My favorite detail about this is the guy on the Surrey committee, who's clearly an heir of Alcock,
Yeah.
who's pushing it, is a man called Arthur Wallet, which is the perfect name for a Surrey committee man.
The names in this podcast series
I
are
know, it's really
just
brilliant. But Arthur Wallet, I'm
extraordinary.
afraid to say,
Arthur
doesn't get his
Wallet.
way.
Ah,
The Surrey wallet is not filled flush with cash from greyhound racing. So that is a sport that never gets off the ground. And
no,
I think it's good. I think the Oval dodged a bullet there. I don't think that you want dogs'
no.
paws
I,
churning it all up.
I
But
don't think so. I
John?
don't think
Do
so.
you want American footballers churning it up?
I think, well, I think we would. We have, in fact, had American footballers
Yeah. So what's going on
churning it
there?
up.
That's
But
terrible.
just
I mean,
before
if
we
you're
get onto
banning
American
dogs, but you
sports,
allow
well,
those
um,
enormous blokes in all their armor to come. So
One
when is
last
this?
one
Tell us
before
about
we
this.
get
When
over
they
to
come?
one last one, but from me, Tom, before we get into our cousins from the other side of the Atlantic. The other one, I don't know a vast amount about exactly what happened, but there is a wonderful picture at the bottom of the stairs in the Galladari stand, which indicates that again, in the sort of Alcockian era of the sort of mid to early 1890s, I think there was some wonder. There was an amazing penny farthing racing
Oh
going on
God,
at the
that would be
Oval,
brilliant. I'd love to see that.
which
Why don't you
that
bring
would
that
be.
back?
Yeah, I think no, now
That'd be
that is something we could
great.
bring
You
back.
could bring back
Yeah, that is something.
pedestrianism, penny farthing racing.
Yeah,
You could let the
absolutely.
Wanderers play there regularly. And actually,
Yeah,
before we come to the American football, talking about sports that Alcock um, uh,
yes.
hosted there is actually baseball. So there's the two American sports have been played there. So
Hmm.
a big baseball match is staged in 1889, isn't it, between the
Yeah, the
Chicago White
Chicago.
Stockings, he says, looking at his notes,
Yes.
and an All-American team, and it's
Yeah,
attended by the Prince of Wales, by
yeah.
W.G. Grace, and by
W.G.
Ivo
Grace.
Bly, who
Yeah,
captained the Ashes-winning team that goes for the first time to Australia
yeah.
after
Tom,
the loss of the
what do you
Ashes
think?
at the Oval.
What do you think WG would have made of baseball?
Um, well, I suppose it's all right. It's not cricket, is it? I
No,
guess is what he'd say.
but it's not
And
cricket.
actually,
You could.
it doesn't appeal because it rains. Crowds
Yeah,
kind of wander off. The Prince of Wales is asked what he thinks about it, and he's very polite and says, "Well, it's seems all right," but then he says cricket's better, which is obviously
cricket.
true. So
Cricket is better.
yeah,
Yeah, and then a few. It's come back and forth a bit. Baseball. Yeah, in the early 2000s, the great Sammy Sosa was at the was there at the ground staging a hitting demonstration, and again, it's if you look at the dimensions of the ground, you'd think it could fit a baseball game. So I think to I think to say that you've seen the last of baseball at the Oval, who knows what could happen.
well, exciting. But what about
Mm.
the American football? Because
Oh,
that was
that
when 2011,
that's 2011,
and it's a
2012,
Chicago team again. So
2013.
what
Well,
is
there's
it
a
about
few
the Oval in
teams.
Chicago?
There's a few teams. So yeah, it was the Oval used to be used as the training venue for the away team, in inverted commas, who would go and play the NFL games in the early days of this caper. In the away teams who would go and play at Wembley. So the team would fly over from the facility in America. They'd arrive on the Thursday. They'd come and do their sort of final training session of the week at the Oval, for which no expense was spared by the NFL. They would they drew an NFL pit field onto the ground. They put posts up at either end, and yeah, they would they
And are they
wouldn't do
playing
very
on the
much.
wicket?
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, but
So how
because
come
all they were
footballers
doing.
aren't allowed to? But
Well,
these
because at
massive,
that stage,
great.
all they were doing really was sort of walk through. So they wouldn't be wearing their
Oh, I
boots.
see.
They wouldn't be wearing
Okay.
their regular NFL whatever you call them, NFL boots. They would just be sort of walking through. So it was an amazing level of expense the NFL went to really deliver an elite experience for these players. But yeah, they were here for sort of usually a maximum of kind of 2 hours. And one of my favourite parts of it was that they would the quarterback and a couple of captains and the coach would end up doing their media in the long room to
That's
a
so wrong,
crowd
isn't
of
it? So wrong.
relatively bemused American journalists.
Well,
And
so
on one occasion, the New England Patriots were the team that came along. So it was really in the great era, for those of you that know NFL, of the New England Patriots, with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. They were really, it was in that peak period. But what the New England Patriots did was they brought over a whole bunch of journalists from Boston with them. And I was sort of wandering around telling some of these journalists about the history of the Oval. And then one of them looked at me, he goes, I'm not going to do the accent. And he goes, son, we're from Boston. I think we know a little bit about history. And I just sort of quietly pointed out that in the year that the Oval was founded, I think America had 19 states. And in the year that the Oval was founded, they gained Florida and Texas, I believe.
way to
And
go, John. Way to go. Way to go.
and
So, but so I'll just quote from a brilliant essay written by Charlie Connolly in an edition of the Night Watchman, which was devoted to the
yeah,
Oval, and he talks about all this, the
yeah,
various sports and things that have been going on at the Oval, and he talks about how when the Chicago Bears came, Jason Roy turned out to instruct the Chicago Bears in the basics of
yeah,
cricket.
yeah.
And Charlie Connolly writes, much to the amusement of the Bears coach Lovey Smith, who, if names are anything to go by, would have fitted right into a late Victorian gentleman's 11, where he'd bowl some economical lobs and make a few useful late middle order runs. I think that's absolutely
Yeah,
bang on.
yeah.
So
Shout out to
so
Lovey Smith.
so the NFL. That's all very glamorous, but none of them are the most glamorous American to have appeared at
No,
the Oval, are they? So tell us
no,
who the most
absolutely
glamorous
not.
American is to have appeared at the Oval. In a
So
helicopter,
20
is that right?
in a helicopter, yeah. So 2012,
So let's just be
in
clear, but so Lord's, the most famous American to have landed at Lord's from a helicopter is Alan Stanford, who is now doing
he's doing
porridge
so
in a state penitentiary
a
for
serious, a
money
serious.
laundering.
What a huge bowl of porridge he's doing as well.
Yeah. So Lords have got Alan Stanford, but the Oval.
We,
What has the Oval got?
Tom, for the purposes of this podcast, yeah, we.
Yeah, of course I'm
It's
we. Of course I am.
South London are we. Don't worry about that. We're talking Mr. Risky Business himself, the Top Gun, Tom Cruise. Absolutely extraordinary. So what has happened? Tom Cruise is in London. He's filming a film which I believe in the UK is known as The Edge of Tomorrow. I think it might be have a different name elsewhere, but I think in the UK it's known as The Edge of Tomorrow. It's a sort of Tom Cruise shooting aliens movie. I've not actually seen it myself. And he to film a particular, I would assume, climactic scene in this movie, the producer has hired Trafalgar Square and Whitehall for the day. So, speaking as a Londoner, thanks very much for your contribution to our tax dollars, and off you go. Sadly, however, obviously, as you would guess, if you know London, hiring Trafalgar Square and Whitehall and completely shutting it down to public access does create some relatively serious traffic problems that kick back across through the whole of London. Cruise is staying in a very nice hotel, I think somewhere in northwest London, and
He's
they
not going
need
to
to
be
get
staying in the,
no,
shit hotel,
no.
is he?
I don't think. I imagine it's his. I imagine the level of hotel he stays in is quite closely bound in his contract.
He's not
I
going to be in the
imagine
Travel
similar.
Lodge.
No, it's similar to when Holland and Sandbrook play the Sydney Opera
Of
House. I don't
course.
imagine they stay in the Travel Lodge.
Of course, we demand
Exactly.
helicopters and blue
Big
M&Ms.
stars need to be treated in certain ways.
Exactly.
So Cruise is staying in a very nice hotel up in Northwest London. But the producer very much needs to get Cruise to the set as quickly as possible because there are quite stringent American union rules that I don't understand around how actors need to be dealt with and the sort of thing. And I think once you leave the hotel, you officially start work. And you're only allowed to work for X amount of hours in a day, so you have to get him there as soon as possible. So they he flies the helicopter. When I say he flies the helicopter, I very much mean he flies the helicopter because he's a trained helicopter pilot. And they were to go search around London for a place where they could land this helicopter. I presume on an earlier version of Google Maps, and they see a large green space not too far from Trafalgar Square. And yeah, one day a colleague of mine just got a phone call, and it was just explained what they wanted. And so ultimately, after a sort of brief period of stunned silence, just to confirm, Tom Cruise would like to come and land his helicopter here at the weekend. Yeah, that's basically it.
And so that
Right.
happened.
And so there it happened, and Cruise came down. Surrey in an all Alcockian sense that Arthur Wallet would have been delighted
Arthur
with.
Wallet would have been all over that. I mean,
would
maybe
have won all
Mr.
over
Cruise
it.
would like to come several times.
Absolutely, yeah.
he'd
So
love it.
he landed the thing and was were very 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 nice to the ground staff who was sat there looking on. I think it's fair to say earnestly as to which part of the ground Cruise would
Did he
set
give a
his
toothy
helicopter down in.
grin and a thumbs up?
Extremely toothy
Yeah,
grin,
I
a
bet he did,
firm
with his glinting
handshake,
white
and
teeth.
he was spirited away onto the back of a motorbike, and off he went to
So, John,
Trafalgar Square.
Just one other film link to the Oval.
Yeah.
And this is Bollywood, not Hollywood.
This is Bollywood, not Hollywood. This is the same year, 2012, I think. May have been 2011. This is a film called Patiala House. Tom, have you seen the British cinema classic Bend It Like Beckham?
You have? Yep.
Yeah, brilliant film. Similar Bollywood version. I don't say Bollywood version of Bend It Like Beckham, but I think possibly inspired by. Storyline centres around
Square cut it like Tendulkar.
Square cut it like Sachin, yes, yeah. Slap it like Sachin. Can't scoop it like Sachin. There you go. And ultimately, vague plot is that there's a second or third generation Indian kid who's living, I think, out in Hounslow, and his father is heartbroken when he discovers that his son's ambition is to play for England, not for India. and this sets this sets the stage for a sort of Bollywood London set Bollywood comedy Bollywood sort of
Yeah,
family comedy movie, and at the culmination of the movie, as you may be able to guess if you're aware of sports movies, is naturally a World Cup final between England and India. I won't say which team the protagonist is playing for,
at
just in
the
case
Oval.
anyone wants to watch it. And yes, the World Cup final is staged at the Oval,
And
and
is
so
there lots of
Bollywood,
dancing and singing?
there is dancing and there is singing and there is all sorts of Bollywood magic. But as you can imagine, Bollywood being Bollywood, nothing but the best. And yeah, they hired the ground. I think for the better part of a week, they restaged the World Cup final. They flew in and paid the commentators who would have been commentating on that World Cup final. So, Brett Lee and Nasser Hussain, and all the
Oh, I must
huge
watch
stars
it.
were in there,
I must
and
watch it. It
they
sounds great.
and they brought about 3,000 extras in to fill
Hmm.
3 or 4 blocks of the ground with various Bollywood extras playing England fans and Indian fans, and yeah, it was an
Well, it sounds
extraordinary
brilliant.
no expense spared. Yeah,
I
Patiala House, look it up.
Okay, well, I will. So you mentioned singing there, and
Mm,
the final section of our looking at mad stuff that's gone on at the Oval, we're going to look at its role as a rock concert venue.
there's
So,
some good stuff here.
so
There
in
is some
so
good
I learned about this
stuff.
from Charlie Connolly's article. I hadn't
Yeah,
realised all this had been going on.
yeah,
And when you read his article, which I highly recommend, it's in the Night Watchman special
yeah,
on the Oval. It's obvious that this is what this is what he finds most entertaining. I mean,
yeah,
he loves this,
yeah,
and I think it's a story that's very very reminiscent of Houghton or Alcock. I mean that tradition is still going on, and it begins in 1970 when the South African tour gets cancelled because of all
yeah,
the D'Oliveira and apartheid and everything, and this means that Surrey are really they're scraping the barrel financially.
yeah.
Mr. Wallet,
Not for
Mr. Wallet
not
is
for the
looking a
first
bit
time.
threadbare,
Yeah,
and they
sadly
really need
so.
to fill
Yeah,
the to fill the gap. And
yeah,
so by 1971, things are so bad that Surrey is really staring down the barrel,
yeah,
and they decide let's stage some concerts here.
yeah.
So the cricket
In
season
the
ends a fortnight
in the
later.
greatest tradition of Surrey, Tom, as we've talked about, they get creative.
They do. They do, because 2 weeks after the end of the season, they're kind of laying coconut matting all over the square. They're building a stage by the at the Vauxhall End, and they have this massive all-day festival. And the list of
Mhm.
people who are there is really impressive.
It's
So they've got the
absolutely amazing.
Faces,
Yeah,
which is Rod Stewart. So he's
Rod
wearing
Stewart.
a very very tight tiger print suit. So that must have been
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Lindisfarne, they go on. Matt the Hopple,
Moot.
so
Let's start that again.
Mott the
Mott the
Hoople.
Hoople. Yeah.
Not Matt the Hopple. I was thinking of Matt Thacker, who's commissioning all this. Mott the Hoople, Atomic
Yeah.
Rooster. I've never heard of Atomic Rooster. Have you heard? Are you a
No,
fan of
me.
Atomic Rooster?
I've
But
not. I'm
the
going to
the
check them out.
headlining act is the Who.
The
So
Who.
that's a
Yeah.
really impressive roster, I think.
Yeah. It's
And
amazing. It's amazing.
making sure that nothing goes wrong, because they did such a good job at Altamont, are the Hells
Yeah.
Angels. They're provided the
Yeah.
security, so
This.
that's
Yeah.
brilliant. So,
This is very much a thing of
so
its time. I believe the concert is it's called Rock for Bangladesh. It's the sister concert of a really famous gig that George Harrison organised in Madison Square Garden earlier that year. And yeah, a lot of the fundraising was in it was to save the Oval, but also to help the with some awful flooding that had taken place in Bangladesh recently.
So it wasn't just about boosting Surrey's coffers, it was also for charity. And I think that's what Surrey are all about, isn't it?
Absolutely, I think this is a
Financial stability,
combination of
but
the
a big
two.
heart.
Yes,
That's why we love them.
we'll
Bless
get that
them.
on a t-shirt. We'll get that
Yeah.
on a t-shirt.
So I'll just read you from Charlie Connolly's article on this. In
Mm.
tribute to the venue, the show's MC wore cricket whites and pads and carried a bat as he announced the headliner's arrival on stage. The bat was then wrested from his grasp by Keith Moon, the drummer. I
Yeah.
mean, he loves throwing things and driving Rolls Royces, swimming pools, and all that. Who, pro-
Legendary Hellraiser.
who proceeded to use it as a makeshift drumstick during the opening song "I Can't Explain" before sending it spinning far into the crowd, much to the alarm of the compere who'd borrowed it from the Surrey nets with a solemn promise to return it. So clearly, a massive success. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
perfect fusion of cricket and and rock music. So brilliant.
unless unless you're Keith Moon, because can we just discuss just for a second? Have you ever played the drums, Tom? Have
No,
you
I
ever?
can't do the
You
drums.
know?
I lack the coordination.
Yeah, I learnt to play drums for a long time, and I'm not very good. But one thing that does tire you out with the drums is the old shoulders and elbows.
Yeah,
It's
so
quite
it's
a
big. I mean,
physical, and
wielding
that's
a
only
willow.
holding drumsticks. Yeah, that's only holding two
Yeah,
drumsticks.
but that's probably
You're
why he's only
really
doing it for a single song.
well. I think possibly Keith Moon and his greatness had underestimated the physical exertion required to
Yeah,
use
but
a cricket bat
also,
as a
I
drumstick.
mean, you wouldn't want to be hit by a
Well,
cricket bat that's been
no,
thrown by Keith Moon. But I mean,
no. But I
I
would
know the
also
whole point of
argue,
Keith Moon is you're not going to worry about something like that. But even so,
well,
health and
yeah,
safety. I mean, they'd be having
yeah.
kittens
Health
about it.
Health and safety gone mad, yeah. Yeah, I would argue that it's probably in the not in the top 3,000 worst things that Keith Moon has done.
No, probably not. Anyway, it's all a great success. And
Yeah,
Melody Maker, they write a review and they say the Oval is it's absolutely natural fit for rock
yeah,
concerts. And so it looks like,
hmm
this is a really exciting new string to the Oval's bow. So the
yeah,
following year, they scheduled 2 more concerts. And the first one, I mean, they've got a brilliant lineup. They've got Hawkwind and Frank Zappa,
yeah.
both appearing on
Frank
the same
Zappa
stage.
with a full orchestra.
And do you know what happens? It rains.
No,
So we began this with account of
honestly,
rain ruining the fun of pedestrianism fans,
yeah,
and I'm afraid that in 1972
hun,
the rain
yeah.
it's lethal for fans of Frank Zappa.
110 years on, it's still raining.
But then they have the second one, and this is Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, who are in their
Yeah,
absolute kind of grandiose
well, yeah.
prog rock pomp.
Well, you know who opened this one as well, Tom. You know the opening acts
Tell
were
me,
a very early Genesis
oh God, I
and
mean, just go on and on and on, never
absolute
stop.
and Wishbone Ash.
I've never even heard of Wishbone Ash. They sound terrible.
Wishbone,
Are they
a
terrible?
very there. Yeah, I mean, if you like prog,
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know,
Well,
it can be-
so
but yeah, early Genesis, extraordinary.
let me read from Charlie Connolly on what Emerson, Lake and Palmer did.
Please,
So they closed the night with a set that included a full-blooded rendition of Tarkus, the 7-part first side of their album of the same name released the previous year. The cover of Tarkus featured an eponymous, heavily armed, wild-eyed armadillo on tank tracks. And according to Keith Emerson, this represented Darwin's theory of evolution in reverse, which is, I mean,
of
it's so
course it did.
70s. It's
Of
so
course it
70s.
did, Keith. Of course it
And
did.
and they've laid on some spectacular special effects. So here's Charlie Connolly. The Oval
Yeah.
has witnessed some unforgettable sights in the course of its long and distinguished history. Hutton's 364, we'll be talking about that. Bradman's Duck, Peterson's
We'll talk
158,
about
we
that.
may be talking about that as well.
We might.
And the 2 giant, smoking, fire-breathing, wild-eyed armadillos at the Vauxhall End. So brilliant. So we could have had more of that, except that very sadly, there were
Yeah.
changes to the licensing law brought in, which meant that
Yeah.
that all rock stadiums had to be all-seaters, and that just meant that it
Yeah.
was uneconomical. But
It
John,
was uneconomical.
it wasn't actually the last time that a rock band performed at, or at least a pop group performed
I was
at
going to
the
say
Oval. So
it may have been the last time a rock band performed at the Oval.
yeah,
Certainly,
so
yes.
pop
But
group. So what's the pop
yeah,
group, and when was it?
2005. For those of you that were there, the one and only time I think the Oval has hosted
Because that was the
T20
first year,
finals
wasn't it?
day.
I think that was the first year.
Not third year, third year,
That
third
was the
third
third year,
year.
was it?
T20
Right.
started in
It
2003.
was
Third
the
year.
first time the Australians played T20.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
right. It was the first
that's right.
international,
Yeah.
first time England played an international
Yeah.
T20 in 2005. But yeah, the sort of phantasmagorical cricket fest that is T20 finals day, and yeah, in the early days of T20, again, the ECB were keen to draw alignments between cricket and pop music and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah,
and
hip, groovy.
it
Yeah.
was yeah, absolutely. And so the Oval on that day played host to no less than who are just about to reform as we make this podcast, Tom. Girls Aloud, absolutely amazing. They
Brilliant.
had a stage down at the pavilion end, and yeah, absolutely amazing. The other one that's worth mentioning in this context was in the summer of 2000 as well, when cricket was in its early days of its Channel 4 era, and the West Indies were over, and Channel 4 again. Brilliant sort of creative thing that Channel 4 did, linked cricket in with a load of West Indian bands, and at lunchtime during the Oval Test in 2000, Mikey Holding was on the field for Channel 4 introducing a performance by no less than the Wailers. which was
Wow.
amazing, and sort of extended the Kennington's history with the Whalers, because Bob Marley famously, when he lived in London, spent a long time playing football on Kennington Park, and visited a Rasta temple that used to exist in Kennington as well. So the Whalers came home to Kennington in 2000 as well. But yeah, Girls Aloud, the last band as it stands
Well,
to shred the boards at the Oval.
that mention of the whalers, we will be looking at the relationship of Caribbean cricket, West Indian cricket, to the
Yes,
Oval later in this series.
I'm
So
excited to
that's
do that.
something to look forward to. But for now, I think we have we've run the gamut. We've covered the whole spectrum of mad things that the Oval has hosted. I think it's a glorious record, one that the Oval can be very, very proud of. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you again for our next episode. Bye bye.
Goodbye.